So hi, we're here. We're going to talk about the satin stitch. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks for how to create the perfect satin stitch. So there's always a few problems that arise when you're doing the satin stitch. One of them would be the angle that your stitch is on, because obviously you want to keep the same angle throughout your stitch. And the second would be how to create a flat, smooth stitch. So for the smooth stitch, I like to run my needle underneath my thread. I kind of pull it up, I straighten it out, and what that does is it kind of flattens each individual strand. So because the strands are twisted together in a 6-strand pattern, because I'm using 6 strands here, when I pull it out and I run my needle underneath, it kind of lays them all out flat on my needle. And spreads them out a bit, almost as if I'd separated my strands and then put them together. But you can see here it twisted. And I pulled it out and I just ran my needle. It kind of straightened them out. I'm using my needle to just fix each strand and let them lay flat. And then it's really giving me that flat, separated look. And then right now I'm just going in a regular pattern side by side. But the other option you can do is where you split your sections. One of the ways to follow the right angle, if you're doing it side by side, is to actually run your needle down the grain of the fabric and follow the weave to get the correct angle. That would be one technique. And then the other technique is going to be where you split it into smaller sections to help you keep the angle correct. So for the first portion, I just did a side-by-side stitch, and you can follow the weave, which is a great tip. But for the second portion, I'm going to show you how I actually took a section, and then I'm going to split it right down the middle, creating one stitch down the center, checking my angle and making sure I can still follow that weave with my needle just to make sure that I'm on the right angle, kind of eyeballing it and checking. Another option is to use a ruler and divide it into sections, and then draw your lines, your guide lines, your guide stitches on those sections. And then now that I have a smaller space that I'm working with, I will continue to split those sections, dividing them in half. And it just makes it easier to divide it in half each time instead of trying to go side by side. And then you realize that you've slowly tilted to a 40-degree angle by the time you get to the end. So as you split them, you're just finding the middle point of each section, splitting it in half, and then that keeps you knowing that you're on the same angle as the stitch before. You just continue on repeating the same pattern by splitting between each section until you've filled the section. This also keeps you from having unnecessary stitches because you just fill until it's full instead of going side by side. So this is probably my preferred method. And then it just keeps all the spaces filled and filled evenly. And then as you can see, I'm actually still using the same technique where when it doesn't quite lay flat, I'm pulling it back up, evening the threads out, and then pulling it back down at the back. And then just kind of fiddling with it until you get it to the right tension and level that you want it to be. And yeah, so that would be my biggest tips and tricks for finishing a satin stitch. Obviously, less strands is going to give you a cleaner and more concise stitch. The more strands you have, the harder it is to get them all to lay flat and evenly. So if you're really wanting like a really detailed, filled in space, I suggest going with like 2 to 3 strands. If you want something with a little bit more dimension and texture, 6 strands is great, even 12 strands, but you're not going to be able to get those 12 strands to lay as flat. You're going to have a nice full 3D effect.